Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Parrish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm the Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs here at the Parrish. And it is my distinct pleasure to present a panel tonight on the land back movement. And this panel is part of the exhibition that's on at the Parrish right now through November 7th. Another Justice, Us is Them, organized by Hank Willis Thomas and For Freedoms. It's also taking place offsite at the Shinnecock Monuments and we have two artists who are presenting there here. That's Nour Batyne and Koyoltzintli Miranda-Rivadeneira. And this program is part of a series of programs that is co-organized in collaboration with For Freedoms as well as with the Watermill Center, with whom we have an ongoing partnership and who is hosting a few artists from the For Freedoms Collective in residency as part of their Inga Maren Otto Fellowship from September 14th through October 7th. So I would like to thank our sponsors for tonight's program, Bank of America, Weill Cornell Medicine Southampton, and the Corcoran Group. And I would like to give you an introduction to the speakers so you know who they are. So Nour Batyne, to my left, is a fine art photographer and a tribal member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. In his work, he explores Indigenous identity, culture, and assimilation. He received a 2016 Dream Starter grant from Running Strong for American Indian Youth to pursue On This Site, which uses photography to showcase significant Native American sites on Long Island. A Parrish collection artist, Jeremy was the 2018 Parrish Roadshow artist and part of Art on the Grid by Public Art Fund in 2020. He lives on the Shinnecock Indian Nation, on the reservation where he founded Ma's House, a BIPOC artist residency. Next is Koyoltzintli Miranda-Rivadeneira. She's an interdisciplinary artist, plant worker, and educator living in New York. She grew up in the coast of Ecuador and the Andes, geographies that permeate her work. She focuses on geopoetics, ancestral technologies, ritual, and storytelling through collaborative processes and personal narratives. Koyo was nominated for Prix Pictet in 2019, and her work has been exhibited in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., the United Nations, Aperture Foundation, and the Photographic Museum of Humanity. She received a photographic fellowship at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris and a NIFA fellowship. Kelly Dennis is a licensed attorney specializing in federal American Indian law and secretary of the Council of Trustees for the Shinnecock Indian Nation. She's a newly appointed member of the Department of Interior Advisory Committee for Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, representing Eastern Regional Tribal Nations. Congratulations, Kelly. She's also a painter who depicts culturally significant symbolism and narratives. Nour Batyne is a creative producer, facilitator, and artist whose work lies at the intersection of immersive storytelling, futures thinking, and social innovation. She is a next-generation Foresight Practitioner Fellow at the School of International Futures and serves as an associate instructor for the nonprofit management MS program at Columbia University. Nour is currently based in New York City and is an organizer for the Wide Awakes, an open source network that radically reimagines the future through creative collaboration. And just a little bit about For Freedoms. It's an artist collective that was founded in 2016 by a coalition of artists, academics, and organizers, including Hank Willis Thomas, Eric Gottesman, Michelle Wu, and Wyatt Gallery. Their work centers on art and creativity as a catalyst for transformative connection and collective liberation. And I think we have one of the artists from the collective here, Kobe Kennedy. Thank you and welcome. And I hand it over to the panel. Thank you.
Okay, so we wanted to have a decentralized conversation, and so that means there won't be one person playing moderator, but we'll all be sharing the responsibility of having this conversation, and we'd love to also invite you to participate in the conversation with us, so feel free to raise your hand if there's anything you want to share or any question you want to ask any members of the panel at any point of this conversation. But I know that one of the questions we wanted to start with was, what does land back mean to you Would anyone like to start?
I can start.
Okay.
So land back is nothing new. It's what our ancestors have always fought for. It's become a hashtag, which is awesome, and a movement where we're really trying to recover and reclaim Indigenous lands. We're trying to achieve justice for Indigenous people, and we are trying to reestablish and reclaim Indigenous sovereignty, and that's meaning political and economic control over lands. It's so important that we continue this movement and try to have that control after being historically occupied after colonization. So I think it's an important movement that is really a revolution in reclaiming stolen lands when sometimes it feels like, you know, we're a stolen people. It's Orange Shirt Day today, and our children, so many Indigenous children were stolen and taken to boarding schools and residential schools, especially in Canada and the United States, and they found mass graves, and so we're wearing orange shirt, and it's something that a Canadian First Nations woman, Phyllis, started, and as she was actually, you know, one of the children who were taken, and they took her orange shirt away. And that was part of the way that, you know, they were able to not only, you know, steal our culture and language away, but, you know, a way to assimilate and kind of just, you know, take us away from our lands and our families. If anybody still needs a little bit of orange, I happen to have a little orange marker with me too. Made a little orange heart in people's hands.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. So when I think of land back, especially something that you were mentioning, Nour, that people ask, some people don't know what land back is. And I just wanted to share like the way that I think about things. And it also, that's how I think about land back. So land back is land back. And when we break down these words into their origin, their etymology, land is associated or synonymous of body, and back is one of the ancient meanings of back means to restore. So I put the sentence together. So land back will be the body that is restored to its original condition. So when I tell people that, there's an immediate, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's immediate connection that we've all known ancestrally of the body with the land. And giving that restoration and supporting that restoration and fighting for it, that's what we're doing.
Maybe I'll jump in next, just based on those two examples. I think we've heard about like how we've gotten here through genocide and other ways of removing Indigenous peoples from their land, and the idea of restoration. And so we've been government and religiously sponsored, put into boarding schools, and had bounties put on Indigenous people's heads through scalping and other means. And so we can't undo these wrongs that we all share as a shared history, but we can, in a very tangible way, return land to Indigenous people. And for me, what I've found in my experience is that even if you strip everything from a people or a community, if you return their sense of belonging, their sense of place, that connection, that I believe over time can bring back everything and return that harmony and that balance. So I think there's just an existential practicality to returning land. There's respecting Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights, and so many other things that are just basic foundational ways that we can move forward as a country. So I think it's really hard to live in a nation that ignores where we came from and ignores things that can be made better. So that's what I think about with Land Back.
Today's also National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, so I think that's pretty apt as part of the Orange Shirt Day, and that originated in Canada, and Native American Day. A lot of things going on.
Yeah, this makes me, think, speaking of truth and reconciliation, one thing that I think is also so true in this moment is that we are experiencing a moment on a global level that requires our immediate attention, and that is the climate crisis, and that is very much, to me, connected to Land Back because of, in many ways, the world we live in today is as a consequence of systems of colonization, extraction, greed, and exploitation, and all over the world. And the next decade is going to shape how habitable our planet will be for generations to come. That is the science. We've known that for a while, since the 70s. We've known that that we have come to a point of no return in terms of the state of our planet, or it's more the planet's going to be fine. It's whether humanity will survive, and I think we know that in the next 10 years, the action that we take will determine the livelihood of many generations to come. And there's this responsibility for people that live and will be living and are adults and have access to various forms of privilege that enable them to play a role in what it means to be in relationship with land in a very different way, because the future depends on it, literally. I think, to me, Land Back is also being able to really sit in this present moment with the truth of what this moment is requiring of us, and on the truth that over 80% of biodiversity around the world is protected by Indigenous people. And what that means, it's time to listen to the ways Indigenous people have been in relationship with the land, and it goes so much more beyond, it's something that we're doing not just for this moment, but for many generations to come. The ripple effects of the Land Back movement are huge, and I'll have to acknowledge that, we are on Shinnecock lands in this moment, and I want to acknowledge my ancestral homelands. So I'm an immigrant and a naturalized U.S. citizen, and I was born in what is today known as Jordan. My ancestral motherlands are now 5 different countries: the north of what is today Jordan, the north of what is occupied territories, Palestine, Israel, south of Lebanon and south of Jordan, formerly known as the Galilee, and that's where my lands, for at least we can track them back for 7 generations minimum, have been farmers, olive tree farmers in those lands. And various forms of displacement have taken place as a result of colonization and exploitation of land. And the Land Back movement in the US has changed the way that we talk about settler colonialism around the world. And I have experienced that in a very, very real way. And so it's an honor to be on this stage with you, talking about Land Back in this moment in time. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, Land Back means so many things, and it extends to so many things. I think it's the core of reaching out to, water back, culture back, language back, and really the earth back, hopefully. Hopefully it's not too late. But there's definitely, a lot of different things happening with tribes being able to, when they actually are able to get the land back, be able to heal that land. There's plants there that they can bring back, and really reactivate sacred and cultural sites that maybe they didn't have access to before. Just recently, the Bears Ears Monument out in, believe, Utah, was able to go back into tribal hands, but kind of under a five-tribe plus the federal government co-management agreement. And actually, I think the state of Utah is fighting that now, and the Supreme Court might review it at some point. But we'll see how that ends up. But there are like pretty good agreements right now for stewardship of lands with tribes. The Coche de Pueblo in New Mexico. Jeremy, we went out there too, and to Bears Ears. They have the tent monument site, and actually, they have pretty broad control of where they can say, okay, we have ceremonies that we have to do, so we're actually closing down the site in order to do that, so it's not open to the public. So, we are doing local things here too, at the Shinnecock, and other Indigenous peoples on Long Island are coming together to try to preserve lands, try to prevent continuous overdevelopment that's been happening. Our waters, surrounding waters and natural resources can only take so much. So there's a Nyamuck Land Trust, and they work with the Peconic Land Trust and try to do those kind of conservationist goals. And then there's also the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. We have one out there who are doing amazing work to try to protect the waters and the nitrogen levels that are there. But we've had these big storms that we don't know how they're going to end up impacting us, and really pray for our relatives in Florida, the Seminole and Miccosukee. And actually, I was on a call yesterday and with the Alaskan Native representatives, and they were definitely in and out with their broadband still after their last big storm hit them, and they do not have access to culturally sustaining, ways after, now they're like kind of stranded, a lot of them, after this storm. So, that for the longest time, Indigenous peoples everywhere have been kind of referred to as the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to the climate change, and the climate crisis is here, and we're dealing with it.
I think, I spent some time here at the Watermill Center, and I was so moved by the leadership of the Shinnecock people, and spent a lot of time with you and some other members. And I think it's so important that people are aware of the work and the organizing that you're doing. And so what is the best way to support the various trusts that are currently there, and the kelp farmers too? Like, can you break it down before we move on?
They definitely have like their own kind of social media following. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook, and I think Nyamuck has a website too through the Peconic Land Trust, and the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, I think, are still making their own website. But yeah, they're pretty easy to find online. I think that, just trying to follow, all the work that they're doing. Often they'll give their own talks too. Then the Shinnecock tribe is also involved in a lot of different just initiatives. And it's great that the Watermill Center and Parrish Art Museum and For Freedoms, we've been able to have this great showcasing of this beautiful artwork on the Shinnecock Monuments on Route 27. But they are currently under attack since 2019 by the New York State Department of Transportation, who claims that their right-of-way, that they have control over our lands. But we are continuing to argue that no, these are our sovereign lands and we have the ability to do this form of economic development on our own tribal territory at Westwoods. Yeah, it's kind of like a continuing form of the state of New York of economic genocide on our nation. So another way you can support is to tell the governor and New York State Department of Transportation and the Attorney General to drop the lawsuit.
And I can do that by like emailing them.
Yep, calling them, emailing them, whatever it takes.
I think that's really important to me. Like I'm gonna do that tomorrow. I'm gonna send an email and give a phone call because I knew that it was happening. I knew the lawsuit was happening since 2019. I had no idea that it was still happening. So literally, like, yeah, this monument is being threatened to take down. Or I think that's a great segue into like what are the misconceptions about land back, or what is it about the visibility of Native American people still being here and demanding for their rights. What are the misconceptions that are? I know you would think like this is not a conversation we should be having, but I think we experience it so much that it's maybe important to surface.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different misconceptions. I think one is in land acknowledgements. This is in the same theme. Some institutions do them. They do them at the beginning of all programs, and they acknowledge the indigenous communities who either had ancestral lands there and were forced to move or are still there and just want to acknowledge that. But I think a lot of spaces that do have the power and the resources and ability to make change stop at that point. So with land back, it isn't just about being woke or just acknowledging it publicly. You have to go beyond and reevaluate your relationship to the land. How can you accommodate indigenous people reactivating or re-accessing that land? Another misconception, I believe, is if indigenous people were to regain their lands back, I think there was some sort of study or equation that on average each indigenous nation has about 4% of their original territory today. So there's this misconception that if we were given the land back, we would remove anyone that's white or European. Yeah. But I believe, at least in Shinnecock's case, in 1640, we welcomed the settlers or colonists. We set aside land for them. And so we do acknowledge that we're all human beings at the end of the day, and we all need a place to stay and live. So we're not really against migration, or we're not really against having people mix. But I think one thing that is a in-between that people don't maybe consider or realize as an option is co-facilitating land with indigenous people, just inviting them to the table, allowing them to decide like what happens to public lands or private lands. I think the East End is a good example of just allowing capitalism and access to thrive and just go to its limits. We just have a lot of issues with people building right on water edges or allowing nitrogen to enter the water. And so when my sister Kelly was talking about the Shinnecock kelp farmers, it is a lot of work of undoing the pollution that has been done for the past 400 years. So in my work, I do a project called On This Site, and it's a survey of Long Island's native sites and Algonquin place names and things like that. And it's just amazing to look at just Long Island alone and see how many natural freshwater bodies have been polluted throughout the years and how it's dwindling even today as a crisis that is slowly creeping up on us. So those are just some of the misconceptions I think of.
Oh, I can, yeah, get into this. I mean, so as an attorney and trying to help the Shinnecock tribe, my tribe, with our land claim, we actually put in a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, it was dismissed without reaching the merits of that decision. But grateful at least that we, got to do it with the Native American Rights Fund, and tried to go as far as we could. but they basically decided that going back to the city of Sherrill v. Oneida Indian Nation, 2005 Supreme Court case, that these land claims are too disruptive to the settled expectations of current landowners to be able to be considered. But these are actually non-possessory claims. No, we're actually not trying to remove. We're really trying to get a different kind of compensation, whether that's additional lands elsewhere or monetary compensation. But also, if there are lands available within our Aboriginal territory that was stolen from us, we would want that land back. And we have been able to get some of that land back at Sugarloaf, and it's amazing. It is, I felt like when we got Sugarloaf back that there was still hope left in this world. And that is our sacred sites that the Peconic Land Trust helped us to reacquire and be able to protect and preserve and remove a mansion from that had been sitting up there vacated. But now we can go and we can gather and we can pray and do our ceremonies, and that's where our ancestors were buried on that. It's documented by archaeologists. It's one of the biggest burials in New York. And where we are continuing to get our ancestors' remains back from different museums and cultural institutions, and are in the process of reburying our ancestors and funerary objects currently.
And the looting continues, right? There are many objects that were buried with your ancestors that have not been reclaimed, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're still out there, and then when we still, I'm sure people come across them and, decide to hold on to them or not report. And that's another thing that we're hoping, and that you can contact the state of New York for too, and the Governor Hochul, to sign I don't have the law on me right now, but it was passed by the House and Senate for unmarked to protect unmarked burials. New York is one of the few states in the United States that does not have a law on the protection of unmarked burials. Yeah, and how to report those.
We'll have to get all the information from you, and we'll make sure that you receive it. Are there any questions or thoughts?
Oh wait, hold on, I do have it.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
It's S5701, or Assembly Bill 6724, legislation known as the Unmarked Burial Site Protection Act. So yes, it passed the Senate and the Assembly unanimously, and it provides the protection of unmarked burials, determination of cultural affiliation, stewardship, and disposition of human remains.
And I can also send an email to the governor about that. Mm-hmm. Incredible. Thank you.
Yep, she still
so
needs
much.
to sign it. We're waiting patiently.
So great, so much.
Incredible. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It's true. I've been so inspired since I first met you, and it's the work that you do is so sacred for so many, and it's incredible. Thank you.
Right. You're asking about the technology to find, and it's escaping ground penetrating radar. And yes, that is something that we do have, and that it has been used. And I believe Shane Weeks can actually talk to about his personal experience of using it. Have you? And then Jeremy is actually a junior, kind of in training and trying to figure out for Shinnecock the tribal historic preservation officer work and office that's needed. So I don't know if you have more information or, learning from other TIPOs around that you might be on calls with about that technology.
Well, ground penetrating radar is very expensive to have, and it's more of a luxury. So it's usually done on places in like Troy and mythic places that have a lot of popular culture attention. So it's usually used in places that there is archaeological, cultural evidence, and you just want to see how far it extends. But we do have a site in the Shinnecock Hills that we do want just protected forever. And so after Sugarloaf Hill was finally preserved, there was actually a 6-month stop of all construction. And I think that was a moment where maybe even Southampton town government acknowledged that there might be burial sites, because after all, we've been here for more than 10,000 years. It's likely that we have that knowledge and we have a designated spot for that and know that information. But after the 6 months ended, pretty much construction continued immediately in that sacred and sensitive area. So this is just going back to why land back is so important. So we're not asking maybe to kick everyone out, even though that would be nice, but maybe at least being told and informed that this land is being desecrated further, and maybe even having tribal members there to overview it at least and make sure nothing is disturbed. So there was another place, the Hawthorne site back in 2018, where a landowner was personally developing their plot. They were making a foundation and came across human remains and a funerary object. And so after several months, we finally convinced them. So that's the process today in New York State. You basically have to convince the private owner to sell their land at reduced market value from the town. And it's up to them at the end of the day if they want to sell it or not, or continue construction. So luckily in that case, we succeeded and had the site preserved and our ancestor repatriated. But I think that was such a public case, and it happens too often that people find human remains, they put them in their archives, or they put them on a coffee table. These are things that are just documented in our cultural books, ways that our graves are robbed, and yet we have colonial grave sites that are fenced up. You don't mess with them. You hope to be there one day and be preserved. But for us, I think it's just an ongoing legacy of erasing Indigenous people.
I have a question about what's happening with the Southampton passed a few years ago, 2 years ago, I think, the graves protection legislation. I was wondering what was happening with that, because I know there was supposedly they were going to go ahead, and they even had the ground penetrating radar machinery, but they don't have an archaeologist to operate it. And a couple of years ago, they said, well, no one knows how to use it. That's why we're not using it. But that was around the time that the legislation was passed. Anything happened with that legislation since?
I mean, they're supposed to be abiding by it because it did pass. And so, as we see, there continues to be, homes going up, new foundations made, especially around the Shinnecock Hills and in the Shinnecock Hills, where a lot of our ancestors were buried. And, we continuously let the town know, are you actually following the laws that you passed? Because this kind of seems like you're skirting a little bit of what you said that you would be dedicated to. And so, we just continue to make our presence known when there's development happening, and, say, well, we invested in having this ground penetrating radar. Where's the archaeologist? We can bring in the state historic preservation officer to help, look at what's there, help monitor when developments are happening, if they're going to continue on, and but we really try to keep them away from sensitive areas. So. it's an ongoing battle. Is the question? Oh.
Can you talk a bit about the origins of the land back movement? How was it started? How has it grown? Is it a national movement, or how has it grown internationally? Just give us a bit of background information.
I mean, for us, it started in 1859 when the land was stolen in the Shinnecock Hills. And like a month after that, our ancestors put in a complaint to try to get the land back and say that it was not right, that, you know, they basically forged our names and tried to intoxicate people. And actually, they made a claim about, you know, we can't be able to harvest our seaweed. Like, that's how we were, you know, kind of supporting ourselves and being able to do fertilizer and, you know, everything else. And so it's really nothing new. It's something that originates from the doctrine of discovery, when the papal bulls were put out in the 1400s to go ahead and take land because indigenous peoples weren't seen as human, and you know, to Christianize and be able to enslave populations and colonize. So that's, you know, ever since the pushback for the doctrine of discovery. And, you know, you saw the Pope actually went and did visits to Canadian First Nations, Indigenous peoples, and, you know, a lot of people were upset that he was there, and yet, you know, there was no formal apology or recognition of that doctrine of discovery. I think he was there to actually apologize for what we're wearing today, the orange shirts, and the boarding schools and the children who. The mass graves that they found at the schools, the residential schools. But yeah, we're still waiting for basically a whole recognition that that doctrine of discovery is something that needs to completely be abolished, and just something that, you know, just the destruction and the violence that continued after that. And, you know, I contemporarily, I think it's the Indian collective that kind of, you can see them, Google them and see about more of their website and what they're about, to do a campaign on land back. It's NDN collective.
It's right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so there's a lot of information there on all the different movements that are happening. And yeah, I think it's happening in so many different ways, which is really cool. And people are kind of waking up to, oh, there's like, you know, I don't have to just, you know, leave my property to whatever. Like, I can actually, you know, in my will or in do a trust in life to, you know, give this back to indigenous peoples, or, you know, some, I think out in California, you can actually pay rent to some tribes. So yeah, it's happening in different ways, and people are accepting and acknowledging and the truth of the, you know, colonial past, and deciding, hey, this is something that, you know, that we can help out here and give back to indigenous peoples.
And I think that right before we started the panel, you were saying something about how the land back movement has influenced other movements around the world.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, reparations, right? Like, I think there's been a shift in the way that we relate to reparations. I've experienced it since the pandemic. We saw the Black Lives Matter movement also go global, and, you know, we experienced on a global scale deeply a shift to the way we know how to exist in the world, right? And the world experienced it in the same way, of course, differently. but I think one thing that I have noticed is on social media as well, right? Like we spent a lot of time behind screens, and a lot of the conversations took on a different way of existing in the world. I recently read a book by Anne Shaumina called Memes to Movements that talks about how memes have really changed, have been very powerful in the way they have changed conversation and been able to like shift culture around things. And I think I'll speak from my own experience and the way I've experienced people talk about settler colonialism. We talk about occupied Palestine. There has been so much more awareness about that. And, 80% of the world was colonized by the British and the French. 80% of the world. Like, there are more people that the global indigenous majority, it is about time that they have the mic, and that we center them and their voices. And honestly, the fact that, it still was my, what's the saying in English? It's still what? My mind? What is this? Blows. It still blows my mind that, English is not my first language, that despite the erasure, right, I feel so grateful that I was able to, I was raised with my grandmother, she's from Nazareth, and she was displaced at the age of 9 as a refugee and got separated from her mother, actually. But I was able to grow up with her, and I learned so much about our cultural heritage and of what we are, what has been left, and stories and creation stories of land and water, and there's so much of the rhythm of their life that was so much in harmony with land that I didn't experience, unfortunately, but I got to experience it through stories from her. So I really believe in the power of oral histories, and what the role that you are taking on in the tribe is really, really important. So despite all the cultural erasure and looting and the stories we have been told about who we are, that that we are still fighting, I think the fact that we are able to talk about land back in this moment the way that we are is just the beginning. It's like scratching the surface of what is really required from us, not just in this country, but around the world. Because one thing I have realized, having been born in a different country and had the privilege to live here, is that the US shapes culture around the world. Literally, from music to language to memes to Hollywood, we underestimate how powerful the culture in the US is around the world, including its movements. And so I'm really looking forward to how this conversation changes and how we continue to invite people to get comfortable with sitting with the truth, right? That's what it is ultimately. It's like how much more comfort can we invite into being able to really sit and reconciling with the fact that the world we live in today is as a result of so much injustice and exploitation and erasure and genocide. And sometimes, yes, your ancestors could have been a part of that, but what does it mean for you in this moment to sit with that and think of harm as a responsibility, and how can we be accountable to that harm is something that I really look forward to continue to be having as conversations within the context of the Land Back movement. It's been very opening in that way, in my experience of it.
I wanted to mention, I'm from Ecuador. My family, I come from a family who they're all, the word would be migrant farmers. So my mother, my grandmother, they all had, they work in different fields in the coast, and they kept moving from one place to the other. And this is their preferred lifestyle. So I grew up a lot going to the coast and going from different villages and visiting families. So when you're talking about growing with your grandmother and your heritage, I really think about how much of that was embedded in me. And every time I go back to Ecuador, I really see this change of conversation, like what we're talking about right now in Land Back. And Manabi, which is the place that I come from, it has been historically almost in terms of cultural resilience, been almost forgotten by the mainstream because they're backwards. They don't speak Spanish very well. Everyone is in like a donkey or a horse. So now that I go back, I see like all these people, like just my own relatives, and when I go visit, everyone is just so strong and proud. And something that has been happening in the villages is that they're really forming a way of allowing and like supporting tourists to come and people to come and visit, but also creating rules. Like, for example, in this area, people cannot party after 10 p.m. You just gotta respect that in this area, in this village, you're just not gonna have music. And people have to do it, you know, because it's also beautiful land, so a lot of tourists wanna come. But I also find that, you know, I'm just sharing because I think it's really interesting about just like all the different ways and how people can organize, and just for us to learn also. Like I'm learning the ways that you organize and how I can support. So I think it's wonderful, yeah.
I like that, setting boundaries.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, you know, I could feel the resonation of your piece. Have you forgotten how magical you are? And remember how you're magical you are when you're talking about where you're from and what they're doing.
So I guess we're talking a little bit about pop culture and activism. So I think many people in the audience came to our beach protest for Shinnecock Access. So Shinnecock, if you don't know, translates to people of the stony shore. And so we have ancestral ties to the ocean, whaling, canoeing, and yet today we have to pay $40, I guess, a day for a permit to access the parking lot in our ancestral beaches. So,
It's 50. But
50 now.
yeah.
Inflation. But I delve into a lot of our tribal history, and my dad used to be a trustee, and my sister's the current trustee, and there was actually a tribal meeting where they voted to trespass in the Shinnecock Hills for lumber. So I think we need to get more activism and mobilization. But the thing that they stipulated was that the tribe would pay for any legal fees if they were arrested. So I think that's another way that we can activate our ancestral lands, create awareness, and maybe pester to the point of, well, maybe it is time to return the land.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to get into a car accident when you're going into New York City. But if you look up over it and you go over the bridge, there is actually, I don't know who put this up. It's like a mystery. We've got like comrades somewhere. But it says land back on one side going into the city, Indigenous land back, and then on coming back it says beach back, hashtag beach back, and the Hamptons or Shinnecock land. And I was like, well, who did this? This is awesome. Yeah, and so, you know, it's kind of like you know, we're definitely out there, and we've got people supporting and joining our, you know, our demonstrations, and it's happening through art. Me and Jeremy, and we share a mother. We're brother and sister. And she's got this great land back butter shirt and bag, and that she had at the Shinnecock powwow. And, you know, if you ever had this butter before, brand, you know that they took the Native woman off the brand, but they kept the land in their logo. So she put it back. She put the Native woman back on there. It's a way for land back.
That happened, like the conversation even around some of the problematic names of football teams and other, that only happened the last few years.
Oh yeah, the whole mascot, issue. And so it's yeah, I mean, where it's just like an awakening across, you know, different things. Like, okay, like, you know, it's time to actually, you know, kind of realize that maybe we shouldn't be doing these things, and there's people who still are around and are impacted negatively by things that we take for granted and have, come from a place of privilege where we feel like it's fine to do what we've been doing. But actually, we've been saying this whole time it's not.
Well, I was going to say with mascots and summer camps that are named after Native people and stereotyped, it's because of that ignorance. And I think we all share that ignorance growing up. We're just not taught about our local history when it comes to Indigenous people. But I think one of the takeaways for me is that without Indigenous connection to land, there is a instrumental and sort of calculated extinction that's happening. So I think Shinnecock is lucky. We're one of 13 groups on Long Island that does have a land base still after 300 or 400 years. But the Montaukets, who, if you're a local, you know that they have a deep history here too. But when they were in the Suffolk County courts, I believe it was 40 of the tribal members, they were declared extinct right in their face. And I think part of that was because as the Long Island Railroad was being built and come through, they were promised resources and help if they just vacated their lands so that Montauk could become a resort. And so they did what they were promised. They left the Indian Hills in Montauk. Their houses were burned down, but they never received that support. And so years later, they were declared extinct because of that lack of land. So it is this very intentional thing.
They actually said they intermarried too much with Negro. So they looked too black to them, to I guess the town or whoever of Montauk to be able to go back to their lands, because they went to the what was it? Wasn't it called something, Mom? The name of the town or Indian town? Okay. They were not allowed to go back to their original territory in Montauk. And they are still fighting just for state recognition. And that is also something you can contact Governor Hochul about. It's something that, Shinnecock people also have to kind of deal with. So it's there's all kinds of continuing issues with racism and just trying to get past these, I guess, ills of colonialism and white supremacy that are, continuing to, I guess, kind of throw a blanket over, or so many of the more issues that we just have to deal with, like climate change and how are we going to live sustainably on this planet when we continually don't recognize certain people as human. So yeah.
So should we see if there's any questions from the audience?
We just do not have enough land. And it's there's a land to trust process that eventually we will need to go through. to be able to get additional lands. And there's a whole another Supreme Court case, Cartier v. Salazar, 2009, that needs a fix to it. So once the U.S. Congress can fix that, it should make the land into trust process easier for us. But, you know, we still have to identify that land. There's so much like sparse land out there that, you know, it would be hard for us to get. But we desperately need additional lands for housing, for economic development projects. You know, where we are being fought right now on our current lands that we say are by virtue of the Indian Non-Intercourse Act passed in 1790, that, you know, we hold our lands in restricted fee, which means that, you know, without approval from the federal government, the U.S. Congress, New York State or others cannot buy our land from us. They cannot make right-of-ways without that approval, and that's why we're currently fighting over the monuments and whether, you know, we're allowed to continue to operate them for amazing artists to put their work up and be able to have that as, and this is like the one economic development endeavor that actually, you know, is really working for us. So, you know, we continue to fight the state on that, and you know, in order for us to be able to fund our programs, to do educational and language workshops, to be able to, you know, pay legal bills, to fund our government. We have a great Boys and Girls Club now, and we want to be able to continue to sustain those things. We need to be able to have our own, you know, forms of economic development. And so those are the things that I think we're dealing with, just to be able to, you know, move on to the self-sustaining way. And we're hoping to, you know, to continue under especially the current Biden administration, working with the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, and that administration to be able to, I guess, coordinate and figure out what resources are available through this new infrastructure law, and see, like, you know, we are one of the coastal tribes that are impacted by the climate crisis, and what's available to figure out these issues. But, you know, who knows what's going to happen in the next election. So, you know, and you're saying how, you know, what happens in the United States impacts the rest of the world. Well, I mean, it's going to be really scary if we go back to where we were 4 years ago.
I'd love to follow up on your question to ask, you know, with the midterms right around the corner, what are some things in addition to us emailing the governor about all of these things on your paper, which we're going to make sure that we get. But I do think, you know, I do believe in grassroots politics and how important it is to be involved in these ways. And I think we've experienced this in many ways in our communities, where over the last 4 years in certain spaces, I'll speak to myself, I felt like people kind of took a, you know, like are no longer involved in the same way that they used to be involved. You know, some people I know that were following every legislation kind of aren't anymore, because it's like, oh, okay, you know, I can take a break now from being as involved. And I don't think that's the case at all. If anything, I think this moment requires even more of our due diligence and our openness to learning and being willing to participate with the system in some way. So what should we be, like, how can we be of support to you in this midterm, ahead of this midterm election? How can we be, like, how can we put our money where our mouth is when it comes to supporting you from a legislative point, you know?
I mean, definitely support those candidates that also may mention that they're pro-land back, as it goes.
Yeah, so candidates are mentioning that they're pro-land back,
Yeah.
which is huge. That was not something that we experienced with candidates before. So now I think that's an important marker for sure.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of demonstrations and protests to also join, and they're all spreading awareness. And I mean, it's kind of awesome how I don't think that people, you know, ever saw how social media would help, you know, with so many, you know, grassroots things. I don't imagine, you know, how we would have been able to get where we are now with so many different campaigns before. So yeah, and memes, I guess, are fun.
Yes.
Yeah, this isn't a question, just kind of a thought that I had listening, to you all. And colonization was not just, as you mentioned, not just stealing the land, but it happened because of the papal bulls and because of the inherent racism and so forth and so on. It the colonization occurred on lots of different fronts. Okay, it was territorial, it was economic, it was cultural, it was political, it was legal, it was psychological. And that, in a way, land back, hashtag land back, represents pushing back on all of those fronts. It's not a small task, and you're to be commended that you're doing it, and we're helping whatever ways we can. But it's legal, it's economic, it's political, trying to pressure the authorities to do the right things. It's cultural, via our art, and it's also psychological, kind of trying to get ourselves and others into a different frame of mind. So that was just a thought.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That makes me, think of so many people's lives have been put in danger, from death threats to literally being put in jail. So, this is just work that has been done for generations, that we are just in many ways like carrying the baton and keeping it going. But we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for so many of our ancestors that have broken down the barriers and kept the doors open, of all of our relatives in this moment when we talk about any of the grassroots movements in this country that started way before anyone started to do memes, and or started to use memes, or like the K-pop fans online were also very much known for the way that they use memes to like disrupt some of the rallies that were taking place, or the trolling that's taking place online as a way of that got a lot of attention as like activism, and that there I wouldn't be able to be sitting on this talking to you in English in this moment if it wasn't for all the ways that and especially women in my ancestors that could not use their voice. I experienced freedom in this moment in a way that my grandmother, who is currently alive, could not even imagine. Even if I share with her my life in New York, I don't think she can still comprehend the freedom that I have as a woman in this moment, and I don't take that for granted in any way. So it's also important to acknowledge our elders and our ancestors, right, that made your parents that are here in this room that we've all been learning from, and very humbly are open to receiving whatever knowledge you want to share with us to continue these conversations, and knowing that we can do it a little bit freer than our elders did, a little bit, and it's continued. Sorry, I saw your hand in the back. My bad.
I think it was very interesting being a black person from Washington, D.C., to see how things changed about the Redskins, right? How people first, because when I was in football fans, I went to Washington again too, right? And then people could say like, no, like there's something wrong with this, and there were arguments over how serious it is, it doesn't really hurt anybody, and what we can do. But it clearly grew to the point I know people stopped watching television. It was also it made it like, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. And it was interesting because he said he would never give it up, right? The guy, Snyder, who owned the Washington Redskins, said no, no, listen and learn more, it became more offensive to people, and people had to raise their consciousness, right? And then he had to change it, but it was a fascinating discussion, at least in the Black community, about how do we feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, I interned a lot in DC during that time and actually joined some of those protests to change the name and change the mascot. I think I even borrowed one of my friend's shirts at one point that had the Caucasians on there instead of the Redskins to see how it would feel. And it got changed. I mean, yes, it's a change in consciousness. It's a change in psychology. It's, you know, it's the whole, like, it's across all different movements that, you know, we have to move towards a world of more inclusion. Whether that's race or gender, and we're hoping we can continue in that right direction, because with everything, you know, as much as you try to push forward, there's so much pushback, and we don't want to go 2 steps back with all of this great momentum that, you know, we have in this moment. And it's, you know, I think we're all a little afraid sometimes at what point, you know, is that pushback, and, you know, what is it going to look like in 10 or 15 years when, you know, maybe we're back in the other end of the pendulum swinging. And, okay, this is going to be another revolutionary moment and evolution in land back. And I'm hoping for a future that, you know, can really be a bright one for everyone. So, yeah.
I hope in 10 years, I mean, I did this whole project about this with the Wide Weeks and with 4 Freedoms called Resilience 2032, where an Indigenous woman in the year 2032, it's an election year, was running for president. It was played by an incredible artist named Morningstar Angeline from the Navajo Nation. And so I want to live in a world believing that by the year 2032, thanks to ranked choice voting, that was the world building the exercise of world building that we participated in, where thanks to ranked choice voting, the land back movement also expands over the next 10 years, and we center conversations about land and the climate crisis in a very different way, and we get our first Indigenous Native American woman as president. So,
So wonderful.
gonna manifest it.
Manifesting.
I think something else that I wanted to add is how we can all participate in this process of decolonization. And when you were saying, like, you know, like political, economical, and I'm always thinking also about the psychological aspect of decolonialization. Like, how do we name things, how naming is a way of reclaiming. And I think about, you know, a niece of mine, she asked me, like, we were driving, and she asked me, why is the Hudson named Hudson? And she asked me, did Hudson created the river? Like, why is a name? And like, and you know, just like, and also something that you were saying, like, you're raised as a kid, and you're just like, you take for granted all these names, all these things as like normal. And at some point, all of us have to do that work of like, okay, I really have to question every single thing that is put in front of me. Even if it's familiar, even if it's comfortable, I still need to question it and need to find that origin so I can know if I am using these words properly or if I am doing the right thing. So I really think that that's just something that we have to do like every single day, even if it's just like a little action, but it just has to be done.
There's a great unlearning in that decolonization process, and it's, you know, we still, it's like coming back again to like those recreation, those boarding schools, and like what was like trying to, you know, assimilate and like force you and force feed you this information, and so that, you know, you're not abiding by, you know, your ancestral cultural ways. And and how unhealthy that is for people. I mean, so many of the children who went through there, they died from tuberculosis, and those who survived, they still have terrible health issues when it comes to diabetes and heart disease, things like that. And it's it's definitely something that we need to continue. It's like a practice that I have to do, my own rethinking of a lot of different things that I've learned. And for every individual, it's different, and it takes time. And to do that introspective work. But it's important to do it.
And it's so uncomfortable. It's a daily commitment to unlearn the colonial language. And, one example for me is, quote unquote, the Middle East, where a lot of people share with me, like, oh, are you Arab? And even people that, I grew up with will still use these terms. It's very difficult to release them, but the Middle East is a colonial term. I don't know what middle of what East they're talking about. And when they say also Arabic is a language, it's not an ethnicity, and it's important to share that information. I think it's daily. There are so many ways that we can be so much more mindful of our language. And I think, like the word powwow, I know is used in popular culture a lot, and it is offensive to use it.
No,
No?
I mean,
Okay.
it is like when you're like, oh, we're gonna have a meeting and do a little powwow over in
Yeah.
the corner over here. Like, okay, that's not cool. But
Yeah. Okay.
but actually, we actually powwow as a cultural celebration. Still call it that when we're actually doing that. And it actually, powwow is the Algonquin word that originates from our people, and a lot of people don't know that. And there's for the first time in a long time, like, within the last few years, we've been holding ceremonies at Westwoods in our sacred space, and have been able to really use our Algonquin language and realize, what we called Long Island and this land meant something, and was symbolic of all these different things that we didn't really realize until, we had these discussions. I think Harry Wallace with the Unkachog Nation, he teaches Algonquin language, and we were like, wow, that's mind-blowing that's, what our, how we came to understood this and our relationship to the water and to the whale and what that meant. And even being able to, use language again, and, our Winnichinuk preschool, teaching our children that and starting them there is amazing now. And I didn't introduce myself in the language, but, usually I would, and just say, Kelly Natesawis, Sakwe, Kwatabune, hello and thank you. My name's Kelly, Shinnecock Kwa Hasanamisko, Nipmunk, Nichipayawank, Shinnecock and Hasanamisko, Nipmunk, those are my tribes. And, it's just being able to use that language again. And I mean, I've only been able to do that within the last few years.
It's illegal, though, in the 70s to...
Yeah, I mean, that's part of getting sent to the boarding schools. You weren't allowed to speak your language. And so... you would get your hair cut, and they would take everything. And so people didn't realize that, and not only that, but they would also, it would be basically be like work camps. It'd force you to work on until your hands were bone dry to do, different, farming activities or whatever, and, call it school, but actually they were work camps.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how many people knew that? I mean, this is probably a room that knew that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that this information is also shared so that people understand how valuable it is how unique and it is that you are able to speak your language in this moment. Imagine, everybody in this room experienced almost everybody in this room lived in a time where that was illegal, and, and that's just a small example. It applies to everything. So I think that's why in this moment, honestly, I feel so grateful that we are having this conversation. It's in some ways restoring my faith in the possibilities, because I think we really are just scratching the surface. I think this is just the beginning. Yes.
What was the, you spoke a little bit about bringing something, hoping to bring something to the Supreme Court. What was that you were mentioning?
So there was a case that was decided back in 2009 that impacts a lot of Eastern tribes that were not under federal recognition during the Indian Reorganization Act, where they were really trying to assimilate tribes into a certain way of governance. But then they also said, okay, federal jurisdiction is happening, so it's easier for us to basically, get lands and take them into trust for these tribes. But a lot of tribes were federally recognized after the 1970s when that was happening. So, including Shinnecock. So until they, it's basically a congressional fix that needs to happen. There's a lot of different challenges that can happen with tribes who are recently federally recognized to be able to acquire new lands and put them into trust. And it's the Carcieri decision from 2009. I'm trying to find the actual site to it with all my paperwork here. But yes, it's something that you can look up. CARCIE, I think. Yeah. Oh, it's 555 US 379 2009. Carcieri, CARCIERI Salazar.
I was thinking about that when you were talking about hoping for in 10, 15 years. You're talking about the pendulum swinging back and the obstacles that are in the way, and how more and more every year people are feeling like if something needs to get to a court like the Supreme Court, it's almost like getting done, like it's just not going to happen. The ways that it's flowing. But I guess it's not a question we answer right now, but just moving forward with everything developing right now, it's interesting to me how thinking about the things that we do and the pushes that we make with the art, the political work, it's interesting to me to think of how we can, the power that we have to make these kind of pillars of justice or injustice, not be like a villain, not seem like a villain, not have the power to be a villain. I don't know, it's just something that's going around in my head. Every time that somebody says we need to get this to the Supreme Court, in my head, it's so reflexive. Well, that's where it's going to end. But, I'm trying to think opposite of that. I don't know.
No, I mean, this is, it can set some dangerous precedents sometimes. That's exactly what happened in this Carcieri case that impacted the Narragansett tribe in Rhode Island and prevented them from getting trust lands. And I misspoke before, the Indian Reorganization Act, 1934, not in the 70s. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some cases that are, and that Cheryl case too, that really messed up some tribes out of the Supreme Court. I mean, there's been a couple of good ones lately, but also scary things happening, like we are not sure what's going to happen with the Indian Child Welfare Act, and if that will continue to be upheld in the Supreme Court. So that's to be decided soon.
I mean, it's interesting seeing the pillars falling down, like DC. I was born and raised in DC, and there's certain things happening that have happened in DC, positive, that we never saw as possible. So,
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I'm curious if at any point, or specifically the last 8 years, that idea was formed or solidified or not. Is this a new kind of feeling that you have?
that feeling of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Well, just in the recent, very recent, the idea that, well, a lot of people are being woken up to it, awakening to the power that the Supreme Court actually has.
Yeah.
For so many people, it's just been this name, it's this court, these things go there that they don't really care about. And then you start realizing that, they're on it for life. It's, that's what actually shapes generations of policy and actual tangible
Roe v. Wade. I mean, what in the world? I'm scared to like travel out of New York sometimes. And, you know, I don't know if they're going to end up putting more justices on the Supreme Court somehow, or to deal with a lot of what's going on there. But, you know, people are saying maybe they have too much power. It's like, you know, it definitely, you know, makes me scared when I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale. So, yeah.
To what y'all are saying, also to what you're saying about in the last few years,
Yeah.
it's feeling coming up at the same time in tandem with that. There's been this feeling of things getting so crazy across the board, not just Supreme Court, but in like even more tangible things to our day. Things getting so crazy and out of control that there's this other side to this other growing feeling that, well, okay, the crazier things get, the less validity they have. And so there's been these growing movements to reform a lot of these, not just organizations, but just ways of thinking. You know, and just like we're talking about, it's really interesting that the larger and, I guess, more audacity that's used in this typo on progression of society, the larger not just pushback from it, but the larger than natural inclination to see it as a facade grows. So that's one of the things, when you mentioned the Supreme Court, all kinds of feelings came through me, and one of them was the fact that, along with that in the last couple of years, you got so many people talking about what they need to reform the Supreme Court, people in actual political power, you know, saying this. So it gives me hope to everything that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, we miss Justice Ginsburg, and yet she's the one who is the author behind the City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation and that whole disruptive kind of case, you know, idea of it for the current landholders, citing the doctrine of discovery. And, you know, she did end up saying after, you know, a while that she regretted that decision. But, you know, it's a lot of power and a lot of, you know, it still holds today. I mean, you know, but.
Is that
Mm-hmm.
is that the one that lets landowners decide whether or not to sell to you?
It's the one that says that it's an equitable defense under the laches that basically saying that land claims are we sat too long on our rights to be able to get any land back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even though our ancestors like immediately said a month later that the land was stolen, so we never stopped fighting.
And so is the Constitution. I think a lot of people also don't know that the Haudenosaunee, what's the name? I don't want to mispronounce it.
Yeah, you said it, yeah.
The Haudenosaunee
Great Law of Peace.
Great Law of Peace is what the U.S. Constitution was inspired by and was created around. And I think we also, we do not hear enough about like the visibility or the truth of what took place in that time at the beginning of settler colonialism. Like you know, we just hear whatever stories we hear, you know, whether it's a Disney movie, literally, like I am so shocked by the design, like how well designed the erasure of Native American people in this country and around the world was executed. Like it's yeah. So there's so much work just to change that narrative and sharing these stories. Like I only learned this year because of an artist named Awilia Winger Bearskin from the Haudenosaunee tribe that the U.S. Constitution was, you know, and why did I only learn that in 2022? Why? You know, like, so I think we all have also a responsibility to be responsible, like to not rely on Wikipedia for information. Like honestly, it frustrates me that Wikipedia is also mostly edited by European white men. And so it's a very specific perspective, right? So I think it's important to also be really diligent with our sources and get curious about the stories we are told and the information we receive. It's work, but we got to do it.
Kelly, is there a place where the list of the things that you talked about that we can address Governor Hochul about, you know, the Montauk, Victim State legislation, maybe to the Shinnecock lawsuit is brought up? Is there a place where sort of these are the things you can do so that more people can know that, so that I can share it on Facebook, so I can tell all my friends, I can say, hey, do this little thing, write this little letter, and mention all these things.
Yeah.
Because the more people that do that, the more it's going to become a thing. Is there a place, is there?
I'll have to check with the Warriors of the Sunrise, see how they're doing, and see, because they used to be able to really get out the message and actually, you know, lead demonstrations and online call-ins and things like that, and put a post out in the email.
The energy's high.
Yeah.
Do something with it. The harness it.
They're the ones who led the sovereignty camp out there, actually right across the street from this monument last year, 2020, yeah. So
I joined a Niamic Land Trust Zoom meeting once, and at the end of it, your mother shared with us really important information and templates for emails to send.
Yeah.
So, right, like.
Yeah, the Warriors of the Sunlight, Warriors of the Sunrise, they will usually lead those templates, or they'll craft the templates and put it out in an email or
So
on Instagram and walk you through it, and everybody will like pause and like, okay, we're all gonna call together. So they're great.
It's important. Like, so Warriors of the Sunrise on Instagram is the best place, or the Niamic
Yeah.
Land Trust website?
Yeah.
No, Warriors of the Sunrise on Instagram. Okay.
And I think they kind of grew out of the Graves Protection Warrior Society and wearing
Yes.
one of their T-shirts, the Ancestral Alliance.
And I think we have one last, or
Hi, my name is Koyoltzintli. I'm privileged to be here, and Shinnecock Nation. I kind of just grew up by here. I'm not really from here. I'm from Peru, Republic of Peru, which is also a colonized nation. But my ancestors are from Shinnecock Nation and Koya, which is the Koreans. I'm interested about like the wampum belt. I want to know more about it too, and like as far as in the context of international law and how can we enforce this? Because like from what I understand is that I heard people mention about like doctrine discovery, but you know they basically made legal illegal, right? And we allowed it, people allowed it, and how do we enforce like your laws and have it be respected too?
Yeah, I mean, the wampum, actually, I'm wearing some here, some beads here, the purple and the white. And so the Great Law of Peace that we were talking about, the Haudenosaunee, so we actually would trade our wampum shells upstate, and we fashioned it here, but also up there, beads and made them into belts. And so those belts would signify the kind of peace agreement. And I think is it 2 rows, and then there's trees for the Great Law of Peace, or a big tree. And they do that with this wampum kind of symbol in these belts that they would present through treaty, and there'd be an agreement made or through trading on that. And internationally, there is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that is actually being recognized in a lot of different countries, but really not in the United States. It's really taking hold, I think, and a lot of South American countries, Central America, where, you know, even using that declaration of the UNDRIP, like they are recognizing, okay, Indigenous people have this sacred, this relationship with this river, and this river should take on like a personhood and be protective in that sense. And helping with the Amazon and trying to protect that. So we're hoping that the United States and Canada and others continue to recognize all of the different articles in that declaration, And because that has so much to do with land back and supporting Indigenous land claims that currently this country falls short on. So it's something we actually brought up in the last few days in our discussions on the new Secretary Deb Haaland's Tribal Advisory Committee. So, you know, the UNDRIP has been around for like almost 20 years now. When is the United States actually going to pay attention? Yeah.
I just want to make a comment, which is, for those people who are interested in learning more about the issues of treaties, it's just in the U.S., so this is only U.S. history, you can go to the National Museum of the American Indian site, which is you just type in National Museum of the American Indian, which is both in Washington, D.C. and in New York City. And there's an exhibit on treaties, and it starts with the Great Law and the original that long ago. So this is it's just a small thing, but it's an exhibit. It's been up about maybe 10 years, but online, if you don't happen to be in Washington, you can get more information about how some of these treaties were negotiated and what happened. And it's a very useful exhibition because it contrasts, it starts before the United States as a country and goes up to more recent times and talks about Native American and in many cases English, but you know, changes once you get to the United States as a nation. Understandings and misunderstandings of what these treaties were about. So that's just, if you're interested in knowing more, that's one place you can go to find out some more information.
And you mentioned the NDN Collective. I find their website to be very helpful, but if you do not follow Kelly or Jeremy or Sean or Tila, incredible members of this community, I learned so much from your presence on Instagram. I learned a lot about things that I need to learn about. And so, you know, you are sitting amongst the wealth of knowledge and the important grassroots work that's happening. So we're very lucky.
You had a question?
Yes, common question. I spoke to an Onondaga man once during the pandemic, and we were talking about power and like usually like we live in a patriarchal society, and yeah, but like in the native way here in the East Coast, from what I understand, is that women have the power. I believe it's matriarch, right?
Yes. Matriarchy back. That's another land back.
Yes, Ashe.
So when do we start like following the Constitution and following or how can you teach us to walk in beauty? How can you teach us to learn about the law and how to, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they've got clan mothers upstate in the Haudenosaunee that are very powerful, and then their tribes, and then here at Shinnecock, we were definitely matrilineal, and the colonists, you know, they when they took the land. They also said only 3 men would be in charge in our tribe, and women did not have the right to speak and did not have the right to vote in our tribe until 1994. So you know we're still kind of dealing internally with that trauma of colonization ourselves, because we know what our history was, but we weren't allowed to have that. And my mother and my father, and they my age, basically me and my brother's age, trying to change that in the 90s to be able to have women have any kind of say of what's going on in our communities and with our nation, and try to get programs for health and the children. And so we've been through a transformation since that time, trying to get back to, those original values of our matrilineal society.
Well, thank you so much for your attention and for being with us. Maybe we can close out with one thing you want people to leave or take away from this conversation today.
Land back means land back. That's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Maybe we could start with Stony Brook, Southampton, and the Shinnecock Hills Golf Course. Just a couple ideas.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
What they said. Wait, can someone take a picture of us? I'm gonna send this to my grandmother because we spoke about her like twice. So, can someone take a picture of us? You have? Okay, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.